Hi, this is Dr. Rhonda Felheim. We're going to be taking a look at the defenses that we have in place. And so we talk about defenses against what? Well, these potential invaders or constant invaders that we have that pertain to our body. And you'll be amazed at the breadth and depth of what we have covered here. Okay, so what are we talking about? Who's trying to get at us? Well, we know that invaders or problems can come at us in the form of chemicals that assault us as environmental toxins or other chemicals. We have cells or multicellular organisms that are constantly trying to break into our systems, and we have viruses, and we know what a threat those can all be. So let's take a look at what we have in place to deal with all of this. Well, first of all, we divide our defenses into two categories: non-specific resistance, which we refer to as innate defenses, and specific resistance, which is referred to as adaptive immunity. And I'm going to break this very clearly into these two categories, and today, just in this particular video, just only be talking about non-specific resistance. So when we say non-specific and we say innate defenses, really what we're talking about are things that are built in, and that we, and cells that we have that are going to help defend us in a very generic kind of manner, meaning they don't care who it is that's knocking on the door. They're going to slam the door in everybody's face the exact same way. They're not going to, respond in any kind of a tailor-made method based on who's knocking at the door. So again, that's what we're talking about today, is the non-specific resistance, meaning the response is going to be generic, okay? And these responses, these defenses, are built in. We're born with them, okay? So let's just look at the different categories. We've got two main categories for non-specific resistance, and what you'll see is that I've put a little yellow box down here to remind you that today the only thing I'm talking about here is non-specific resistance. That's it. As you can see then, we have two subcategories of non-specific responses. The first one being surface membrane barriers, and the second one being cellular and chemical defenses. So let's just talk for a few minutes about the surface membrane barriers. Well, we know the skin, from studying the skin in 2085, you know that one of its key jobs is protection, and it's water repellent. We don't soak up all the water in the bathtub or shower when we take our shower, so that's very key. Now, something else to keep in mind is that our skin is absolutely covered with bacteria all the time, but that bacteria does not make it in. So the skin itself is very protective, and the sebaceous glands secrete oils that actually have antibacterial mechanisms to them, actually protect us from the bacteria that our skin is covered with. So very protective. Now, mucous membranes, just stop and think for a second. Where do you find mucous membranes? Right, we find them lining the cavities that open to the outside world. Okay, and no matter how deep those might be, or deep within our body, such as the digestive system, and anyway, mucous membranes typically, are pretty mucousy. They secrete mucus onto the surface, and the job of the mucus then, as you know, is to catch anything coming in that doesn't belong. So that would be our surface and membrane barriers, and that would be then our first line of defense. Okay, our very first line of defense then in place. And we know, see how this fits non-specific? It's like, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what's trying to get in, the skin's going to keep it out. It doesn't matter what the debris is that makes its way into the orifice, the mucus will capture it. All right, so let's move on to the second category of nonspecific responses, which would be cellular and chemical defenses. You may want to note that there are 5 different cellular and chemical defenses that we'll be talking about, and again, here we are, nonspecific. And because I'm going to go through each of these categories one at a time, and so you could, if you wrote these down now, you could have a little outline of where we're going or where you are in studying this information. So let's first look at the leukocytes that are involved in our generic defense, our nonspecific. And you're already familiar with all of these. We talked about them with the blood. Neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes. These are not new, but you should go back at this time and review exactly what is their function. And when you look at that, you'll see, oh, okay, that's pretty non-specific. And they are, defending us against anything that may not belong in our body in a very generic manner. Okay, now lymphocytes, as I said, the T and B lymphocytes are going to be very much involved in the specific resistance. However, the natural killer cells fall into this category with the non-specific, and that's why you see lymphocytes here. Please keep in mind that the T and B lymphocytes will be involved with the specific response, the specific resistance. Okay, our macrophage system, we do have, in general, for our nonspecific responses, we have the macrophages, and again, they're just major phagocytes out in the tissue. In the blood, they're referred to as monocytes. But these are all through our body, and these do make up, then, they're very much involved in the diffuse lymphatic tissue. Dendritic cells, I hope that you figured out that those were they're found in the epidermis of the skin. So they are, again, macrophages, phagocytes, but they are specific to the skin. And reticular cells, we don't think of them as being major phagocytes, but they are capable of phagocytosis, and these are primarily the cells that are going to make up the soft organs, are going to build the infrastructure that we find in soft organs. Now, second in the list, we have antimicrobial proteins. Antimicrobial proteins. All right, so again, these are going to be proteins that are going to discourage microbial growth in some way. And the first one being this interferon. And if you look at this word, you'll see another word in this word. What do you see? What do you see? Interfere, right? Interfere. All right, well, that will tell you what interferon does. Interferon is a chemical that's secreted from, or protein. It's a protein, act as a chemical, protein that's released from infected self cells, meaning there's a virus or something that's inside the cell, and this cell is going to release interferon, and the interferon is going to alert the non-infected self cells, that the virus is there, and it will then interfere with the virus's ability to infect other cells. So interferon interferes with the ability of a virus to infect other healthy non-infected cells, and it is released from infected self cells. Okay. Another antimicrobial protein group that we talk about are called complement proteins. Okay, so let's take a look at complement proteins here. And you can see that I've blocked out part of this picture. That was on purpose. And that's so that we can just look at complements at this time, and then we'll bring out the other half later when it's more appropriate. But now we're talking about nonspecific response and how complement proteins work against microbial microbes. Microbes. Okay, so first of all, let's understand complement proteins. There's about 20 different proteins that are considered complement proteins, and they don't really go out and work individually to get rid of microbes or any type of pathogen that's come in. What they will do is work together. So these proteins, are a group of proteins then that work together in a non-specific response system to microbes that make their way into our system. And so let's take a look at how they work. Well, these proteins will respond and be a part of making inflammation happen. Okay, so they're responsible for helping set off the inflammatory process, and we're going to talk more about inflammation, so I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail right here, but please know that the complement proteins are a part of getting that going. Okay, the one of the other things they do is they actually lyse the cell. And if you think about lysis and what that means to, create an opening in the cell membrane that will actually end up killing the cell. So complement proteins do ultimately, or can ultimately, end or result in the death of the cell. And that's really very important, and we're going to carry that information forward way down the line with immunity. But for now, let's just understand that the complement proteins are responding in a very nonspecific manner. They don't care what the cell is. If it doesn't belong there, they're going to lyse it. Okay? Now, in addition to setting off inflammation and cell lysis, complement proteins will act to what we call opsonize the microbes, meaning they're going to make them easier targets for the phagocytes to come in and consume. Okay, and we know that phagocytes are the whole macrophage system and some of the leukocytes. Okay, so because we're non-specific, and so again, opsonize is just let's make them a better, easier target, and we're going to do that in several ways. We can do that by in the fluids connecting the microbes together, so it kind of clumps them, and they can't go off and move away and do what they were going to do. So immobilizing them is a big part of opsonization. It's opsonization that again is making them an easier target for the phagocytes. Immune clearance is a role that the complement proteins play, and I think it'll be easier for you to understand immune clearance if I talk about it again when we're talking about specific immunity. But immune clearance is something that complement proteins play a role in. Okay, this is an attack by complement proteins on a membrane. So here's your cell membrane. See the phospholipid bilayer, and you can see that the proteins don't go off by themselves and just cause something to happen. It's a whole complex of complement proteins that work together, and they create this pore. It's literally a hole, a pore in the cell membrane, which will allow the intracellular fluid to leave, okay, and kill the cell. Okay, our third category is natural killer cells. Natural killer cells. And these are some kind of ugly, aren't they? Scary ugly. But we've got them. Our body's full of them. Our body's full of them, and they're working very hard to keep us healthy. But look what they're doing. They have these processes that come out, and they will actually lyse the surface of a foreign cell or infected a foreign cell or a cell that's infected, and they will inject it with substances that will then kill the cell. So this is very nonspecific. They don't care who the cell is. They don't care. They don't care if this is, the cell of a microbe A or B or C or a cancer cell, or they don't care. If it's a foreign cell, they're going to kill it. So these are natural killer cells, and they carry out what we call immune surveillance. In other words, they just hang out, and any foreign cell that makes its way in, they will kill. So this is very nonspecific. Let's take a look at how natural killer cells work. Here's the enemy cell, and I think I may have said that it could be an infected self cell, but I don't believe that's true. So leave that out. Foreign cell, enemy cell. All right. Natural killer cell says, "Oh, this is a foreign cell." It's going to lyse it. It's going to lyse it and inject perforins and granzymes. Perforin and granzymes, and these are just substances that will actually kill the cell, lead to apoptosis, which is cell death. And then what's going to happen is here comes our nonspecific macrophages as well, and they're going to consume the consume the remnant. Okay, so the fourth category within nonspecific was fever. And what do you think of when you hear the word pyromaniac? Yeah, somebody who likes to set fires or play with fires, right? Okay, so pyrogens then are chemical substances that will communicate with our hypothalamus and tell our hypothalamus to reset the thermostat higher. Okay, so where do these pyrogens come from? Well, they can come from phagocytes. They can come from phagocytes that consume a pathogen. They can come from phagocytes that consume a pathogen, and they can release then pyrogens that go to the hypothalamus and say, "Ooh, we've got bacteria here. We've got somebody that doesn't belong." All right? Or it can be a substance that's on the pathogen cell membrane itself. Okay, and once that gets released, it would end up communicating with the hypothalamus again. So let's talk about what function does fever serve? What function does fever serve? Well, let's see. We change the temperature inside the organism, us. We change the temperature. Well, what does that do to bacteria, or what does that do to the microbe? Well, it'll oftentimes kill them or make the environment, much less desirable for them, because they want to be inside our body, because that's a desirable environment for them to be in. They like the 98.6 temperature there. So if we increase it, not only can we kill some of the pathogens, but we will also increase our metabolic rate in order to handle those pathogens. The question I typically hear is, well, why do we take medications to lower our temperature then when we get sick? Why don't we just let the fever do its job? Well, unfortunately, if you have a high fever for a long period of time, it will start damaging our own tissues. High temperatures, we know, will what we call denature proteins, which unfolds our proteins, and they can't then refold themselves, and they can't become functional again. So once they're destroyed, we that's then destroying our own body, and so that can eventually lead to a real bad outcome, even death. So we do need to control fever, and there's no magic number for how long can we have a fever without it doing damage. It's totally individualized, and as I always say in class, you really should consult your own physician about that, especially for children, because again, there's just no magic number. Okay, but fever is a built-in mechanism for helping to decrease the presence of a pathogen. Generic again, non-specific. Okay, so this is just to remind you of where we are in things. We've come this far, and now we're moving on through to inflammation. We are still in cellular and chemical defenses that are non-specific in nature. So let's take a look at inflammation. Here we have, let's just say something as simple as a splinter coming through our epithelium here, our epidermis, into the dermis, and along with it, you can't help this, along with it there will be bacteria. There will be microbes coming through the surface of the skin. Well, that's not good. Well, then we do not want those microbes getting into the blood and traveling through our body. So here there will be chemicals that are released from the damaged tissue that are alerting other cells. We also know that we have these mast cells out in the tissue, and I don't think that I've ever introduced them yet. Mast cells are basophils that are out in the tissue. Okay, basophils that are out in the tissue. So here we would have basophils in the capillaries. Mast cells do the same thing. So these mast cells then will release chemicals as well to help facilitate a response to having the microbes in the system. And you can see our leukocytes, neutrophils specifically are the frontline response. And because of the histamine presence, we're going to have some increased permeability of the capillaries. And here our leukocytes are going to, through the process of diapedesis, we're going to leave the capillaries, enter the tissue, and head towards the activity. Okay, head towards the activity. So we do know we're going to have the chemical response from cells, as well as them being phagocytes coming out here and trying to consume not only dead, damaged cells that are ours, but the microbes as well. So all of this chemical communication, we refer to that as chemotaxis. Chemotaxis. Okay, and as you can see, diapedesis then involves the leukocytes moving through the capillary wall in order to get out to where the action's happening. Now, essentially, what are we doing here with inflammation? What's going on? Well, of course, we're trying to get rid of the microbe, but we're trying to cordon this off. We want to wall this off, and then, bring in the forces and try to eliminate this bacteria. So again, we don't want this to get into the blood. So essentially, when we get a little injury and you get this little pocket, you're going to have some dead cells in there. You're going to have some dead bacteria in there. And if we can't completely clear that out real fast, I want you to think about, what is the result? What happens right there? What do we get? We get a little pocket of pus. Yes, we get a little pocket of pus. And typically, if it's very small, your body's going to be able to eventually take care of that and clear that out. But sometimes, it doesn't. Sometimes it can't, and it's a very large area. And this infection could potentially spread as a result of that. And that's when you typically people get on antibiotics. So, but for little splinters and things like that, we just may get a little bit of pus just because there's a time lag between, when everything can get cleared out. But this again is a very important defense response. All of these cells involved do not care which particular bacteria is making its entrance. What they're most interested in is the fact that there is a bacteria there, and they will very generically approach it, phagocytize it, break it down, using the lysozymes that are present inside them. Okay, so I'm going to end this this video clip on this note.